Tell us a little bit about what it was like in the early years for you, Lynn. What are your memories?
Well,
who was your supervisor?
I joined the Blade at the Victory Building. Victor Building on 9th Street. And on the corner of H and 9th was a huge parking lot and a teeny tiny standalone building which held the Chesapeake Club. And I don't know, I never went to lunch at the Chesapeake Club, but these two might have. The city was a very different place in terms of nightlife choices, and the Chesapeake Club was one.
I think it was Chesapeake House.
Chesapeake House. Okay.
Yes.
Well, they do know more about it than I do. At night, 9th Street was very different too. A lot of movie, I would call them peep shows, and one steakhouse converted from steak in the afternoon to Texas something or other. Anyway, the city was different.
Mm-hmm.
The city was losing population. I had commission sales experience, and it's rare that the old girl network works, but the sales manager of the Blade was playing tennis with my best friend, and they talked me up. I had just moved back to the area. So the interview, which I mentioned earlier, went well because I had long hair and a dog instead of a shaved head and a cat. Don Michaels hired me, and Phil had moved from the desk near from the junior desk to the senior desk. He was behind me. It was before fax machines. It was a time when Phil could smoke in the office. One morning early in our relationship, he announced he had to quit, and I supported him until he didn't quit, and I think that was our first fight. He used to keep his ashtray in the drawer and smoke out a window.
So he was considerate.
He's always been very considerate.
Okay.
We've done well together.
So did you all feel that you had a camaraderie initially, became friends right away?
Absolutely not.
Yes.
Yes, no.
Did you ever socialize outside of work in those years?
We tried a little bit, but no, I was a radical lesbian feminist behind the long hair. And
like longer than it is now?
no, I don't have much style, so it hasn't changed in the last 30 years. But mostly I was interested. I moved here to find a lesbian community, and I pursued that with vigor. And Phil was in his own niche communities, doing his own thing. It was very different. Gay Lib was a concept, but the coalescence around community need for unity hadn't happened yet. The AIDS crisis came forward, or put that forward, and I was on the fringe of the lesbian community because I chose to work at the Blade and suffered all sorts of girls, tedious conversations, either at dinner parties or horrific potlucks where, why would you work with them? I do have a show and tell.
So there was an anti-Blade stigma in the local lesbian community at the time, you would say? What was that about?
Well, see, I want to zing you as a lesbian, a radical lesbian feminist, and say, no, it's not about you. It was about their independence and a lesbian nation. And if you want to read on it, Jill Johnston was writing books about separatism. The art department was run by, Phil's laughing, and Lou, you might remember Kate Ellison and Obie. What was Obie's full name? Somebody O'Brien, Catherine O'Brien or something. These girls left the Blade for a land collective in Kentucky.
Wow, okay.
I mean, they withdrew. But at that time, my vet, my lawyer, my dentist, you could sing. I sang with a lesbian choir. MCC was emerging. You could go to church with other gays. Everybody was gay in my life. And it's personified by that Joan Byron photo in our office with a guy carrying the sign that says, my Uncle Harry is, my doctor is, my lawyer is, and I think my Uncle Harry is, I am too. People were coming out in big numbers, and it was a political statement. but each community needed its own space.
And do you recall the Blade, and you must have because you took pains to subscribe to it when you were in San Diego, did the Blade cover lesbian issues as much as they did gay issues, or was there
I have
overlap?
no idea the content split or the column inch, you know, I would guess no. What happened was there was equal opportunity, again, dating or personal classified advertising happened. The lesbian community was never as big as the gay male community, so I wasn't expecting that. I don't know, you're not going to do a close-up. There was a lesbian publication called The Blah, which is a total, lampoon of the Washington Blade. Sue Hyde and some of the lesbians of the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force at the time did a phenomenal job. It's called the Gay Male Weekly, Weekly.
Oh, okay.
I think this is the only copy still in existence, but I did put it behind a frame because it just amused me to no end. There was and she went on to write Funhouse for Broadway. Alison Bechtel was a lesbian cartoonist, and every time I mentioned or someone announced I worked at the Blade, everyone in the room would descend on me. Why don't you run Dykes to Watch Out For more often? And the answer would be, we want to read it weekly. Well, the poor woman only made it on a bi-monthly schedule. She only did 2 columns, 2 cartoons a month. So we couldn't. We were running lesbian content as much as we could, but not as often as lesbians wanted us to.
And were you concerned at all that working at the Blade would possibly negatively impact your career down the road?
Nowhere as concerned as the girlfriend I was with at the time. As I interviewed at the Blade, she announced, "You're already too gay, you're going to ruin my career." So I did ruin her life by ending that relationship. My mother was pretty concerned, and it was oddly at my sister's wedding a few Januaries into. It was a winter wedding, and it was beautiful, Dale. But Mom took me aside before the reception and said, "Do you have to tell people where you work? Do you have to?" So there were times and places when I just worked for a weekly newspaper in Washington, D.C. The newspaper scene was different then, so it could have been one of 5. I never denied it, but occasionally downplayed it to keep my mother happy.
Okay, Lou, can you tell me a little bit about how your job description, well, first let's start with how did you go from being a contributor to coming on as a regular full-time employee? And that was, I think, in '84?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I think it came about because I was writing more frequently and regularly for the Blade around that time. And
Still the same editor?
I believe so. At that time, I'm trying to remember if it was Don Michaels at the time. Wasn't he the sort of the in charge person? I don't know if he had the title publisher, but at one point he was an editor. But then there was a Steve Martz, who may have been around then. He was the editor in a good part of the '80s. But as we know, the Blade was growing gradually, and then at
Do we know what year it became a weekly?
Oh boy.
We've looked it up like 6 times. It was somewhere in the 70s. 78?
I thought it became
80.
bi-weekly in
the
'78, and it became weekly in '82.
Feels right.
Okay,
Maybe
all right, so it was
that
a
time.
weekly by the time.
It was a weekly then, and it was growing. Advertising was increasing, thanks to Phil and Lynn and others. And so they had more financial capability to hire someone. And so I believe I started as half-time or part-time. And within a few years, it was full-time.
Okay. All right. And did you have to quit another job to go on full-time at the Blade, or did you work some at another job too, or how was that for you?
I think at that time I was doing I was working for a trade association, actually, after my newsletter job. And that was another issue which prevented me from using my actual name, because I was supposed to be one of the spokespersons of this association, and it wouldn't have been permitted to work for another publication. But I believe I was doing, at the immediate time I was hired by the Blade full-time, I was doing freelancing, so I had left one of the other jobs and was free to just make that transition.
Okay. And when did you start using your legal name in print?
There again, it was sometime in the mid-'80s, I believe. And I think we looked it up not too long ago, but it came after I really didn't have a reason to no longer use my name because I was working full-time for the Blade. I was out to family and friends and so forth. But I think the thing that sort of prompted it was a sad development. There was a fire of a gay adult theater called the Cinema Follies, and 9 men died, sadly. They were trapped with smoke and fire and flames. And it turned out
that was here in Washington.
This was here in Washington. And all of them were in the closet, and sadly, this fire that took their lives outed them. And I said to myself, I think it's time, I don't want to have a tragedy result in my outing, so I said, it's time to use my name.
And did you experience any repercussions from that, or?
No, not that I'm aware of. And even that's another issue we could talk about, but I think looking back, except for a small number of conservative organizations that we may have covered who would not talk to us, generally the Blade was received positively by newsmakers, government officials, and local and national.
Phil, who were some of your accounts in the early years, and were there clients that didn't want to have anything to do with the Blade? And just tell me a little bit about what it was like securing accounts in those early years.
Annie's Paramount Steakhouse, and I'm going to draw a complete blank going into a bunch of others, but one of the smartest things that I ended up doing, Shannon suggested that I take our directories and really make them so that we had lots of doctors and therapists and dentists and available to our readers. And so I went around and got testimonials from some of the directory advertisers that we had, and I think we had one directory at that time, and took those to new doctors and lawyers, and when we were done, we had 7 directory pages or half-page ads full of directories with 14 ads in each. So that was really the first step that made me feel like, okay, I'm going to be okay financially. This really will work. And then gradually over time, oh God, advertisers. There's so many that are gone. Skewers was an early advertiser.
What was that?
Brought to you by Andy Shalal.
Yeah, brought to you by Andy Shalal, and it was on Peace Street, a Mediterranean restaurant.
Oh, okay.
He currently is Busboys and Poets.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he ended up adding Cafe Luna, Olson's Books. I might have stolen that one from Jim Dealey.
Good for you.
Capital Video.
And Jimmy
Or
Townsend
was
is
it?
still
It was
on
Washington.
His
No,
wife
Jimmy.
had
That
video. Yeah.
it got split. Capital Video.
In a
That was an interesting. The first time I ever went and met her. I don't know. Maybe we'll need to edit this out.
Let it rip, Phil.
The first time I went and met her, she ended up and was screaming and yelling the whole time I was there. And I ended up walking out and bursting into tears. And I walked to my car and got to my car, and sorry about that. Drove back to the office, and I walked into the office, and Shannon said to me, "Are you okay?" And I burst into tears all over again. And she said, "Okay, wait a minute. This is not, first of all, anybody ever starts talking to you like that again, walk out. You don't have to put up with somebody dealing with you like that. Now, unfortunately, you have to go back and make her apologize to you." And I hadn't lost the account or anything, so I was gonna have to deal with her one way or another. And Shannon said, "You need to go back, make an appointment, go back and see her and make her apologize to you." And I did. Talk about human development at work. It was kind of cool that Shannon pushed me into doing that.
And why did she think that was important?
Because she knew that there were going to be all kinds of other advertisers I was going to go to that were going to try to walk all over me.
Okay.
And she didn't want me to let people walk on me.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, there were rug stores all along Connecticut Avenue. You would walk into a business, and early on, people would say, "Who are you with?" And I would say, "I'm with the Washington Blade," but I might drop my voice an octave or just to kind of say it quieter. And gradually, over time, that became, a disadvantage. It was like, I work at the Washington Blade, the gay newspaper, and people responded to that. They understood, oh gee, they had heard word of mouth gave other businesses good business. So, the Blade's here to see me. Good.
And did you sense that around that time that a lot of the mom and pop businesses here knew what the Blade was or had any particular interest in advertising in the Blade versus other options they might have had?
So at the time, the community center was DuPont Circle.
Sure.
So P Street and Connecticut Avenue, within a couple years, 17th Street had been added to that. Now that didn't mean that we weren't in Adams Morgan or Capitol Hill, but those businesses, there were a lot of people, most of them I would say knew what the Blade was because we were on every street corner.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Or in most of those businesses. Mm-hmm. But there would be the odd person that hadn't heard of us right there. Or an employee in a business that was new and hadn't necessarily been brought up to speed on where they were working.
Okay. All right, and how many sales reps were in the department at that time, and how did you all divide up the accounts? I'll let Lynn answer this. How did you decide who was going to get which? Was it divided up geographically?
She stole
how did you
them.
not
She stole them.
step on each other's toes?
There was an ad traffic person and Philemy. The preponderance of income came from classifieds during the 80s, I would think, I did not know that then, but looking back at records and page counts. House accounts were kept by the traffic manager. Any nonprofit went to him. And they had pretty strict geographic areas. So Phil had DuPont Circle, I had Capitol Hill, I had Virginia, he had Maryland. It didn't make a lot of sense, but prospecting calls from those areas came to you. And on your downtime, if you wanted to go walk a street or visit somebody and ask for referrals, that was all on you. And as Phil said, without a fax machine or a computer or a cell phone, and my first cell phone was this big, and I did get the first one, and it lasted 2 days before it was pickpocketed out of my shoulder bag there on the corner by the Chesapeake house. It was a big AT&T thing. You sort of looked like you were on a MASH radio or some kind of World War II thing.
What year was that, do you think?
Don't know, 88, 80,
Okay.
92? I don't know, somewhere in there.